Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Radio Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk radio. Be advised that the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. Here's your conservative, but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. You have tuned in to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. It's my pleasure to be here today. Thoughts, questions, feedback, adoration, and praise can, well, kidding, not kidding, can always be sent to Todd at ToddHuffShow.com or 317-210-2830. I want to talk today about the status of the one big, beautiful bill. So there is fighting over the one big, beautiful bill. In fact, you may have seen Elon Musk's comments about the one big, beautiful bill. We played some of those comments. Well, he was asked about it last week. But he also came out with commentary about it yesterday or a day ago, maybe. So I'm going to talk about that today. There's other things in the stack as well, but that's where I wanted to start, my friends. I want to remind you here off the top that Red, White, and Brand is where you can go. If you're a business owner, if you are someone in a business who's in HR, if you have a responsibility in marketing, and you need branded products, logoed merchandise, apparel, trade show materials, anything with your logo on it, Red, White, and Brand can help you. By the way, that's a division of this program. RedWhiteandBrand.com is the website. You can shop there. You'll get 10% off your first order. Promo code TODD is how you get that. Online orders have free shipping, but sometimes it's just better to reach out to the team. You can do that through the website RedWhiteandBrand.com. Your logo on almost anything, my friends. RedWhiteandBrand.com, promo code Todd. All right, so let's start here. Where to start with this one big, beautiful bill? There's a bunch of, I guess, information out about the one big, beautiful bill. And, one of the issues, one of the challenges that exist out there, even for someone who, well, in my position here, that does a show that is responsible to try to explain things, talk about things, share opinions on things, is the sheer size of some of these bills is enormous, number one. You may have noticed, you may have heard Marjorie Taylor Greene actually saying she's now against the bill, even though she voted for the bill, because there's a provision in the bill that prevents states from addressing or, I guess, passing any legislation limiting or regulating, I guess would be the right word to say there, AI for the next 10 years. She says, look, I believe in states' rights. I don't like this. I don't like that it's in the bill. I didn't know it was in the bill. She's taken some criticism for this, which on the one hand, I would say absolutely. Why are we voting on bills, regardless of which party's in power? Why are we voting on bills that we don't know what's fully in them? She's tried to give an explanation as to why that is the case, saying that at first you're not given the full text, you're given summaries. She missed, I don't know, a page of the summary. I don't know, something like that. Yes, she voted for the bill. It reminds me of going back in time when Nancy Pelosi told us, my goodness, when was that? That might have been Obamacare. We have to pass the bill in order to know what's in the bill. She said, you will not hear me saying stupid garbage like that. You should know what's in the bill before you vote for the bill or against the bill. I guess, though, if you're given a bill and you don't know what's in it and you have to vote, you should vote against it. Because, it's like, in my mind, it's similar to, not exactly, but it just reminds me of being on a jury. And I remember when I sat on a jury, we completed our service on that jury in 2000. This past, it was Memorial Day weekend when the Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend, I think technically into Wednesday morning of that week in 2018. That's been 7 years ago. That's hard to believe for me. It's really hard to believe. But anyway, that's when I served on a jury. And I remember learning these things in school, but I also remember experiencing this in person. And if you've been on a jury, especially on a jury that has difficult, a difficult case or one that's highly emotional, just, even if it's, I guess, not that, serious of charges, or I don't know, it's probably the same anywhere. Ours were very serious charges. It involved the death of a 5-year-old boy. It's tragic, terrible stuff. But I remember when we were going through the process of jury selection, I remember being asked or watching people be asked questions by the attorneys about, how they would vote on something. And it was remarkable to me how many people didn't understand. Now, some people, of course, in my opinion, were playing a game to not be chosen for the jury. They would say, because this involved a child, there were questions about that. How do you feel juror number 7 if someone is charged with harming a child? And one of the potential jurors, he was dismissed, but he said, if it involves a child and it's that serious, they're guilty, right? That's what he said. Maybe he was just trying to get out of it, but of course that caused the defense to say, I don't want that guy on the jury. He's already decided that my client is guilty. And so, but when you look at evidence in a jury trial, if you're a juror, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to have a bar that says reasonable doubt. And if the evidence gets me to the point where I say I'm beyond any reasonable doubt that there's any other explanation for what happened than besides the one that suggests that that accuses the defendant of committing said crime, right? If I have no reasonable doubt that he is guilty, then I have to say that he's guilty. But I have to get there. I can't just get there because I heard a tremendous opening statement from the prosecution. I've got to let the whole thing play out. I've got to watch the prosecution present the evidence. In fact, there's even something in the Bible about this. One side seems right? The side that present their case first seems right until you see the cross-examination or the process of the defense begin to enter into the courtroom. Then it changes things. Well, maybe there is an explanation for that. Maybe that does, maybe that isn't as cut and dry as the prosecution was alleging. And you have to get there in your mind. And you only vote for a conviction if you've reached the level that says we're now past any reasonable doubt. Then I vote to convict. I'm not choosing whether I think he's innocent or not guilty. I reach a level that says they have proven he's guilty. That's the process. If I don't reach the level, I might even think he probably did it as a juror. But if it's not beyond a reasonable doubt, probably did it isn't enough to get someone, shouldn't be enough anyway, to get someone thrown into prison for the rest of their lives. There should be beyond a reasonable doubt. That should be no other explanation. I'm incredibly confident that this is what happened. And then you cast your vote for not guilty. In a similar way, I would say it's not the same thing, but I think that there are some things that we can pull from one to apply to the other. And I would say in a similar way, when a piece of legislation is introduced in Congress, I have to read it. I have to understand it. I have to then also think about the ramifications of the legislation. Are there any unintended consequences that could come from this? Right? Are there any obvious consequences that can come from this? Not just I read it, it sounds great, let me vote for it. And I got to tell you, unfortunately, that is what has happened. That's what happens a lot of times in Congress. A lot of times they don't know what's in the bill. And I would say if you don't know what's in the bill, then obviously the first thing is to delay, not for the purposes of obstructing the bill, but let's just have a reasonable amount of time to understand what's in the bill so then we can vote on it. That's step number one. Having these tight timelines, and I get there's oftentimes important legislation and so forth, but I would contend, and I'm talking to the Republicans here too. Republicans are the ones running the show. I would contend that if it's important legislation, you could say, well, it's got to get done. We've got to pass it now. I would look at that a little differently and say, if this is so important, we better make sure we're passing the right legislation. We better make sure that there's nothing else that could happen that could be negative from this. I'll tell you another problem, and it appears to be the case with this bill. There are things tucked away in here. Why are there certain things in this bill? Right? Why do we... Rand Paul, who I actually have a lot of respect for. The president has gone after Rand Paul. This is what Trump does, by the way. Trump goes after Rand Paul. Metaphorically, both guns a-blazing here. This is just how Trump is with this stuff. And it's fine. It's just the way he operates. But I don't mind Rand Paul. There's a lot of things I like about Rand Paul. But Trump's come out against him pretty hard. He posted on Truth Social, Rand votes no on everything, but never has any practical or constructive ideas. His ideas are actually crazy losers. The people of Kentucky can't stand him. This is a big growth bill. So, I would say to a point, it is politics. It's politics, but, Rand is an ally, but Trump is used to getting people. He wins in these ways. He won on the debate stage all the way back in 2016. Everybody had a nickname, right? Little Marco. On Lion Ted, was it? Everybody had a nickname. That's how he does it, and he does it to anyone who stands in the way of what he's trying to do. Now, in Trump's defense here, I would say that this is important. This is a big piece of legislation, what is trying to be done. I think that there have been things that the media has tried to convince us about this legislation that aren't true, that Democrats are out here saying, what Democrats are out here saying. Let me pull this up here. Where is this? Here we go. Headline here. What is the Town Hall? White House shuts down one of the most disgusting lies being spread about the one big beautiful bill, written by Leah Barkowskis of Town Hall. And Hakeem Jeffries is on State of the Union with Dana Bash, CNN. And I want you to listen to this exchange. He actually goes on here and tells CNN and the people watching CNN that this bill will literally cause people to die. That's what he says. Listen to this.
This bill actually hurts everyday Americans in order to reward billionaires. It would strip away health care from approximately 14 million Americans. Premiums, co-pays, and deductibles for tens of millions more will go up. Actually, if it ever were to be implemented into law, hospitals will close, nursing homes will shut down, and people will literally die.
People will literally die, he says. Hospitals will close, nursing homes. They're just going to shut down left and right because of the one big, beautiful bill. Now, I think that there's criticism to be had for this legislation. I think that there's at least there are questions that remain unanswered regarding the amount of debt that this adds or doesn't add. See, there's people, and this is where I would say to you, even here as a host of a program who follows this stuff closely, there are there are various explanations as to what this would do for government spending. It's wide and varied. Trump says, look, the CBO, Congressional Budget Office, doesn't let us, it won't take into its accounting of the cost of this legislation. It refuses to take into the account that we're going to extend the tax cuts and the impact that has, the positive impact that has on the economy and on government receipts, by the way. It doesn't take that into account, and so it's screwing up the actual totals. And I would say that's certainly a possibility, but I'm also finding things in here that are problematic. For example, what Marjorie Taylor Greene's concern is about not allowing states to address AI for the next 10 years, to have any restrictions or regulations. I'm not a regulation guy, but I also am a guy who says, hey, let's not restrict states' abilities to do things that might be important or necessary with something that is, who knows what AI is going to look like in 10 years. I mean, that's almost incomprehensible. But the White House responded. The White House responded to Hakeem Jeffries' stupid comment here that people are going to die. Here's what the White House said in a memo here, Mythbuster: no, people will not literally die with the one big beautiful bill. That was released on a couple of days ago. I guess that would have been on Monday was the 2nd. Here's what they say. Fact number 1, Medicaid will be strengthened for the American citizens for whom the program was designed: pregnant women, children, people with disabilities, low-income seniors, and other vulnerable low-income families, by removing at least 1.4 million illegal immigrants from the program, ending taxpayer-funded gender mutilation surgeries for minors, and eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. The one big beautiful bill will ensure Medicaid better serves the American people. This is actually something that I agree with on Trump's side. This is correct. The numbers, when they quote unquote cut Medicaid, they're not cutting benefits for people who are accessing or who are part of the program and legally who are part of the program, who are qualified for the program. Whatever your thoughts about Medicaid might be, some of you might think we need to have cuts to Medicaid. That's not what's in here. There are cuts, but it's not cuts to the benefits. It's cuts that will result from people being removed from the program who aren't part of the program. It is cuts that include taxpayer-funded gender mutilation surgeries for minors. By the way, you may have seen this as well. Perhaps you have not, but one of the things that is happening is the FBI is receiving tips on hospitals, doctors, medical professionals, whatever, who are engaged in, allegedly, gender mutilation surgeries for minors. Just the FYI, that was in, I think, yesterday's stack of stuff, or maybe Monday's. And then the last thing is just the overall cuts that come from eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse. That's where the savings in Medicaid come from. And I think that this is accurate and true. They're not trying to... Trump is a lot of things that I like, but Trump is not, well, beyond that. Trump is doing a lot that I like. I think that is good for the country. But whatever, again, our thoughts on Medicaid may be, which I'm not saying it needs to be eliminated. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying one thing I know about him is that he has no interest in cutting it. He has interest in cutting spending federally for people who aren't legally permitted or qualified for these programs. That's what's happening here. Fact number 2 that's been put out in this fact sheet: 4.8 million able-bodied adults on Medicaid are choosing not to work And by implementing common sense, Clinton-era work, volunteer education, or training requirements, the One Big Beautiful Bill lifts them up to find a better quality of life through the dignity of work, through work, job training, or part-time volunteering. This requirement will strengthen the system to better help those in need of assistance. Work requirements are a bipartisan solution supported by Joe Biden. So that's what the White House says. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with having work requirements. In fact, again, you know that I'm almost done with this the Bible recap. But this is a biblical. Listen, I'm not saying this. I'm not getting into the whole church and state separation. I'm not taking it to that level. That's not what's going on here. But I'm saying you will find a similar approach echoed in the scriptures. The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. That's what it says. There's also commands to take care of people, especially widows and orphans and people who are in need, people who can't provide for themselves. It doesn't say if you can't work, you don't eat. It says if you don't work. So it assumes that you're a working, an able-bodied person who has the ability to work. And if you have the ability to work and you're getting this, if you're part of this program, if you're getting this subsidy, you should absolutely be willing to work. The White House is trying to make this stuff as clear as possible. So, more to say on this, the fight over the One Big Beautiful Bill. I'll get to that on the other side of the break, my friends. But we're talking about work here. Let me say this. If you're in sales, you know what sales work can look like. You know that you could put in a lot of work to improve your sales abilities. And you know, ultimately what matters is the bottom line. No one delivers as well as Matt Easton and Easton University. This system is one of the best, perhaps the best I have ever seen. It's practical, it's proven, it's built to help you sell smarter, close faster, make more money. And if you sign up to be a student through our website, Matt Easton will personally jump on a call with you and talk you through the sales challenge that you're currently having, help you get started. So you'll get one-on-one help from one of the best in the business. But you got to take the first step. You've got to take action. Visit toddhuffshow.com/Easton, EASTON. toddhuffshow.com/Easton. My friends, if you follow this system, I really believe it's going to pay off. I absolutely do. Take the first step today, and you can thank me later. toddhuffshow.com/Easton. Quick timeout. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Listen, if you want to be against this bill, be against it for the right reasons. Don't be against it because it's cutting Medicaid. Don't be against it because of work requirements for Medicaid. Those are very reasonable approaches. Do not be against it for those reasons. And listen, if you want to believe that the projections made by those determining the overall cost, the amount of deficit this may or may not add, if you have questions and uncertainty about how that's calculated, who to trust, I mean, I'm with you on that. If you want to believe, in fact, I'm actually okay with saying I think Trump probably has a point, or people who defend this legislation have a point, that this that there's going to be more economic benefit to what's going on that's going to change the calculus for the cost of this legislation. I lean that direction. Now, will it be in the long term? It's going to reduce the deficit. It's going to reduce the deficit by what, 1.5 trillion over 10 years. Those who are opposed to the bill say, listen, in the short term, it actually adds to it. And we never get to the long-term years. Those years, that's tomorrow's money. We don't know what's going to happen. What we do know is this next year it adds, according to the projections, it adds to the deficit. I think Trump would say no, it doesn't, because the benefits of everything else that we're doing are going to have a brighter economic impact and reality that we're going to be experiencing. And that's a fair argument to make to a point. Will it get us to zero? I don't know. I think that typically when things are scored by the CBO, they underestimate what something is actually going to cost, the true impact of the cost over time. And when it comes to revenue, I also think that they're inclined to not be as optimistic about the economy. And I think those, especially that latter factor there, I think is working against Trump here. Now, you've heard me say that when they first were, beginning this fight and ironed this bill out and it passed the House of Representatives, you heard me say on this program that, I see this from both sides. The purist in me says that this bill should be changed before it's passed. The realist in me says this very well may be the only thing, the best thing that we can get passed. And that's where I told you that I kind of landed on this legislation. Now, I'm not against those who have problems with this. Trump's fired up at these folks. Trump is going for blood, political blood here. I shared with you what he said about Rand Paul. In fact, I want to play a clip.
I think it's an important debate to have.
Pause that here. I want to play a clip here of Rand Paul responding to Trump's post on Truth Social. Trump posted, Rand votes no on everything, but never has any practical or constructive ideas. Now, I would say, listen, I like Rand a lot. Sometimes Rand might be a little too theoretical and not deal with the practical. I can see that, but I am in general on board with what Rand is trying to do. But Trump doesn't stop there. He says his ideas are actually crazy losers, in parentheses, with an exclamation point. The people of Kentucky can't stand him. This is a big growth bill. So Trump's saying, look, Rand's ideas are crazy, Trump says. This bill is going to unleash growth. This is a good thing. The people of Kentucky don't like this guy. He's just against everything. He's not for anything. That's Trump's position. I can understand why Trump might think that way. I can also understand that Trump's probably saying these things primarily to put pressure on Trump to change his votes, because they're almost to the finish line on this thing, right? There's only a couple of Republicans that can prevent this thing from being passed, or who may end up preventing this thing from being passed, as is in the Senate. So Trump is trying to push this across the finish line. That being said, I just want to play Rand's response to some of these posts that Trump has made on Truth Social. Here they are. Here it is.
I think it's an important debate to have. I don't make it personal at all. I like the president, supported the president. In fact, I'm for the tax cuts. I am for a lot of the bill. But I can't, in good conscience, give up every principle that I stand for and every principle that I was elected upon, and that's that we can't accumulate more debt. $2 trillion in debt this year is too much. If you're going to borrow $5 trillion, it means they're going to get to that limit within the next year or two. They're planning on spending $5 trillion they don't have, and I'm just not for that. But there is a way around all of this. They could get my vote, and I could vote for the package if they take out the debt ceiling and vote on that separately.
So that's the issue for Rand, ultimately, is he doesn't want to have this big increase to the debt ceiling. Rand Paul's concern, and I share this concern as well, Rand Paul's concern is, look, we don't want to have this massive increase to the debt ceiling, because when we increase the debt ceiling, they're basically, to those inside the government, it basically means we've just given you the green light to spend a bunch more money. And we've gone through all these, we've gone through Doge, we've gone through all of these things to get to this point where we've campaigned on this. We've got momentum in this particular area. We're headed in the right direction. I think that's clear, but it's not for those who are sick and tired, like Thomas Massey, like Rand Paul, of watching promises be made. And with this, I'm on their side on this. The government or Republicans, people elected representatives, senators, and so forth, it's always we can do a little bit more next time. They always kick the can down the road one more step in front of us. And again, what we have to do, and I think the challenge here is to say, okay, is there any scenario where, because we have to be realistic. We have to be realistic, and you're going to lose votes the other way, right, wrong, or indifferent, and there's not much room to spare. You're not going to get Democrats supporting this. So you've only got a couple of votes you can lose, and if you don't do enough when it comes to reducing the debt, you're going to lose people like Rand Paul, Thomas Massie. When you do too much, you're going to lose the moderates, the people who are in the middle. Candidly, there's probably more still in that camp that you could stand to lose. And so you have to be realistic. And that's the challenge, right? Especially for someone who's ideologically pure. And I don't mean that in some insulting way. Trump's insulting him and his ideas. I don't mean that as some insult. I think we actually need people, more principled constitutional conservatives in limited government types in Congress. I think that's necessary. But I also think that there's a line, and it's hard to tell the line, right? Because if you know, I remember I was talking with someone, for example, about Indiana's law on abortion, right? There's not a total ban here, but I forget, it's a number of weeks where you could still have an abortion. I'd have to look that up exactly. But it's not an outright and complete ban. It's practically fairly close. So if you're someone who firmly believes, like me, for example, that life begins at conception, there's no belief about it. It's a scientifically demonstrable fact. Life begins at conception. That is a human life. Yes, it's not that life, he or she is not as fully developed as someone who's a year old or 20 years old, but what does that have to do with anything? That person in the womb has the entire genetic makeup of who they're going to be. Obviously, there's choice, and not everything's just built into your DNA, but the full person is already there. It just needs to grow. He or she needs to grow and develop. And so it just presents problems to someone who says, I want to protect all those lives, but I can't get enough support. So do I vote? Do I vote for the best thing we can possibly get? Or is that an abandonment of my principles? Could I have pushed further? Yeah, those are tough decisions, and I completely understand. You have to get the best that you can get, even if it's not exactly the right thing or what you're striving for. So that, I think, is really what's at play here. So, my friends, going to take a time out here in a moment, but before I do that, you know that I'm about supporting companies that share our values. One of those companies is MyPillow. MyPillow is a patriotic company that creates really, really nice products at fair prices, especially if you use my discount code TODD at mypillow.com. But they have good products. They're American-made. Mike Lindell is an American patriot, and they're pushing in the same direction that you are, my friends. So check them out, mypillow.com. We've got Father's Day coming up here. That's something that many of your fathers would like having, a product from Mike Lindell, and you can get that by going to mypillow.com. Save some money in the process by using promo code TODD during the checkout process. mypillow.com, promo code TODD. Quick time out, my friends. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Indiana, I referenced this just in, I guess, as a bit of an analogy to talk about trying to figure out, what's the best case scenario we could get passed through legislation, and what the reality is versus what the ideal situation is. And I referenced abortion law, and Oz looked it up. I've got it here too. I knew that there was, many people would probably say there's a ban, but there's not a complete ban on abortion here, but it is going to be much rarer. This goes back a couple of years ago when it went into effect in August of 23. But there are some exceptions. And my point in bringing that up was not to get into the weeds on this, was to say that there are some exceptions up until 10 weeks for some exceptions for things like rape and incest. If the fetus, the unborn child, is not expected to survive, or if the pregnant person's life, the woman's life is at risk during pregnancy, which I always find that, listen, it just never made sense to me. This whole concept that you have to abort a child to save the mother. I think you save the mother and you can deliver the child and try to save the child too. That never made sense to me, how you have to kill one person to save another. It seems like a really flawed way of thinking. But anyway, it's much different than it was, and it's very, very limited with some exceptions. So I pointed that out to say it's not a total ban. Some people who are say that abortion should be totally banned, they had to settle for this. And likewise, when it comes to this legislation, that the one big beautiful bill, we're going to have to decide where we settle, because candidly, we're not going to get a perfect scenario. So Trump's gone to Truth Social to post a lot of things. Here's one of his posts about the one big beautiful bill. He says, so many false statements are being made about the one big beautiful bill, but what nobody understands is that it's the single biggest spending cut in history by far. But there will be no cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. In fact, they will be saved from the incompetence of the Democrats, Trump says. The Democrats, who have totally lost their confidence and their way, are saying whatever comes to mind, anything to win. He's right about this, by the way. They suffered the greatest humiliation in the history of politics, and they're desperate to get back on their game. But they won't be able to do that because their policies are so bad. In fact, they would lead to the destruction of our country, and almost did. That's true as well. Look back. You don't have to look back very far to see how much ground we've made up in such a short time. Just look at inflation. Look at how it's incredibly low. I referenced on this program, there's several measures of inflation. And there was one measure of inflation a month or two ago that was at zero, not the primary consumer price index. It's at 2 point something, I think. It's very, very low. I mean, we're talking a couple of years ago having nearly reached 10%. And this is dramatically different. The best case in point here is the situation along the border. That is a massive improvement. Democrats' policies almost did lead to the destruction of the country. Back to Trump's post here. The only cutting we will do is waste, fraud, and abuse, something that should have been done by the incompetent radical left Democrats for the last 4 years, but wasn't. So again, Trump's fighting. The bill is close to being passed. You've got Rand Paul opposing it, saying, look, you can attack me if you want. I like President Trump. This isn't personal for me. I've got ideas that I think are important. We've ignored the debt side of this problem in America for far too long. We're tired of hearing about how it's going to be addressed next time or in the latter half of this legislation or whatever. We've got to get it to where it's not adding to the deficit now. Certain scoring, Congressional Budget Office scoring shows that this is going to last, or going to add to the deficit in the near term, in the short term. Rand Paul wants to address that. Listen, I understand both sides of this. I'd like to see the side that's demanding a little bit more done on the cut side, on the side that says it's not going to add to the deficit. I'd like to see him be able to eke some other things out. There's some other very problematic things in this bill as well, including this database that is apparently going to be built. That's part of this system, or part of this legislation, I should say. I mean, Trump's out there posting Here's another post about the One Big Beautiful Bill. Passing the One Big Beautiful Bill is a historic opportunity to turn our country around after 4 disastrous years under Joe Biden. We will take a massive step to balancing our budget by enacting the largest mandatory spending cut ever, and Americans will get to keep more of their money with the largest tax cut ever, and no longer taxing tips, overtime, or Social Security for seniors. These are good things. Something 80 million voters supported in November. It will unleash American energy by expediting permitting for energy and refilling the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. It will make American air travel great again by purchasing the final air traffic control system. I mean, you've got a bunch of the Golden Dome system. Trump's really pushing hard here in the closing phase of this legislation. I'm out of time this hour, friends. Gotta wrap up. SDG.